Welcome to the Everall, a realm where stories breathe, ancient prophecies awaken, and the echo of fate lingers in every whispered word. Forgotten gods seek dire vengeance, and heroes are forged in the crucible of legendary conflicts. So find your place by the fire, let the world beyond fade away, and listen as the Everall unfolds. The stars are set to tell a tale, from lofty peak to shadowed vale. A clarion call spake for you to hear, a story now told for the willing ear. Come and see, adventurous seeker, hear the myths as old as time. Find truth wrapped in gilded frame, a token for the mind. Forever has the ancients spoken, for all shall the tales be told. Chord of words from the start unbroken, brought to life in the hearts of the bold.
It was as if the leaves were falling in reverse, and time itself had been reduced to an imperceptibly slow momentum. Or so it appeared to Renik as he lay on the root-cracked cobblestone, the breath of his lungs forcefully taken when his body was slammed to the ground. For likely the 5th time since the fight began late this morning, the young man picked himself up from the fallen leaves and dirt, his free hand brushing away sweat-soaked, unkempt black hair from his face, the grit and dust clinging to his tan skin in the humid, heavy-laden air. At 18 years of age, Renik Kashtan was strong and agile, as capable with a blade in a skirmish as he was in searching dusty scrolls and reading leather-bound texts for stories of ancient battles and forgotten heroes. Both abilities were honed over the last decade by the weekly combat practice and subsequent study sessions required of him by his teacher. He came from a lineage of capable hunters and warriors, renowned for their endurance and tenacity in battle. Though he regularly surpassed the skills of his siblings and peers with sword, staff, and bow, he'd never once been able to best his current opponent for more than a few seconds at a time. He relished even those momentary victories for what they were, considering the decades of experience and level of skill that he was up against. He began circling to the old man's left side, seeking to exploit the limp still carried by the grizzled, graying veteran, a painful reminder of a perilous day on some distant and half-forgotten battlefield, from a brutal conflict which lived on only in aching scars and memory. The old man shifted his stance, stepping back while guiding his cloak behind him with his free hand, its green-dyed woolen folds catching the musty air, billowing in the breeze. The movement allowed the sunshine to gleam across the man's worn but meticulously maintained black leather jerkin. Both of them wore leather belts and scabbards about their waists, fashioned by their red-haired Vergan neighbor, Tora, who crafted them as a gift to carry their sabers, each being sturdy blades forged by her husband, a local blacksmith lovingly known as Alric the Anvil. The nickname was earned in no small part due to his unwavering, immovable stubbornness when customers tried haggling over payment for his work. But his work was true, especially in making their blades, having forged them from an alloy of rare sunspire steel and even rarer night silver, each blade given freely as gifts of gratitude after Renik's family had purchased Alric, Tora, and their children from the barony slave market. That day, Garen and his siblings had granted the kind Vergan family their freedom without hesitation, and helped them find a home near their own in the miser's district. The blades were gifts of unspeakable gratitude, and Renik cherished his own saber almost as much as he might a member of his family. In Ward Harbor City, there were thousands of men employed as guards and reeves to keep the peace and enforce the many laws of the metropolis, but no matter the size of their force, or the ingenuity of their policies to thwart thieves and vagrants, crime remained rampant in the city, fostered by dozens of violent gangs and criminal organizations. Men both young and old, such as Renik and the man he now dueled in the courtyard, were expected to carry upon their persons some means of defense, even when moving about within the walls, or in the case of the more refined nobility and merchant lords, They were encouraged to hire personnel qualified to oversee their security as they traveled about their business. Thanks to these unfortunate circumstances, Renik now stood perspiring and soaked from the most recent exchange of swordplay, sore and slowed by bruises inflicted by previous strikes landed upon his person. He felt aggravated by the mundanity of the routine he carried out each morning in the courtyard, a repetitive cycle of sparring on this pretender's battlefield adjacent to his family's apartments, each day fervently attempting to prove to his teacher that he could defend both himself and even those he would seek to protect. Thus far, he had failed to prove himself up to his elders' standards, and thus his teacher demanded their lessons continue until Renik could fully defend himself against techniques and combat procedures which the old man referred to as mere child's play. What I'm asking is nothing more than what could be done by any dimwit alley thug or drunken roadside brigand. As the ringing in his head from his teacher's previous strike began to fade away, his body pulsed with pain, muscles aching, and the most recent of bruises shouting. The old man who'd struck him whilst wearing a deriding smile on his beard-covered face continued his obnoxious chuckling. This gibing laughter was a constant habit which Renik loathed, knowing it was intended to goad him into further rage and exasperation, which would translate to a less capable defense when left unchecked. Scowling fiercely, Renik met the old man's gaze, then examined him closely from toe to head, taking in every detail that could possibly aid his next strategy of attack. The limping right leg, unreliable if too much weight shifted onto it without a cane. The stretching leather armor, too small for his teacher's daily growing belly, enlarged by so many ales and pastries from Hadrick's hearth down the lane. The tightness restricting the old warrior from bending forward without resistance, slowing him even more. The loosened leather belt around his waist for comfort's sake, which occasionally led to the weight of his teacher's scabbard sliding the entire belt around his tunic, causing the scabbard's end to trip him up as it knocked between his legs. Putting manipulations of these details into one plan of attack, Renik crouched low, then sprung forward with cat-like speed, whipping the gleaming saber upwards with both hands before letting go with his left, allowing the sword to speed toward the old man's left shoulder, currently unguarded as Renik dashed onward. The old man tensed, sliding his left foot across the ground in an arc rather than lifting it to step back as Renik had anticipated, and thrust his own saber upward, both hands guiding its ascent. The flat of their blades met just next to the old man's face, producing a high-peeled, pure note as steel scraped against steel. Twisting his wrist to arc the blade up with increased momentum, Renik stepped back and angled his chest and shoulders downward, flicking the blade towards his teacher's neck, then down and across with the flat of his sword, as if to smack him in the ribs. He then intended to dash underneath his opponent's upheld arms and blade, but as his right arms continued arcing towards his teacher's side, Renik perceived a better route to ending the fight, and noticed his teacher's arms still recovering from the previous block. Grinning to himself as he pondered the aged man's utter slowness, he closed the space between them, curling his neck and left shoulder down to jump and roll across the ground, smiling as his confidence soared with the belief that he'd finally land a blow skillful enough to persuade the old man to end the day's lessons. If he timed his roll correctly, he would find the tip of his blade resting just below his teacher's chin. Yet, to his great surprise a moment later, he found himself toppled to the ground, having tripped over the old man's outstretched foot, sensing another sting across his neck and upper back from the flat of his teacher's blade, a pain which caused him to immediately realize his gambit had failed. He faltered, unable to find words in response to the disappointment and confusion in discovering that the old man had successfully, somehow, evaded the well-planned attack. He further confirmed his failure as his eyes flicked up to see his teacher standing behind him, the grin on the old man's bearded face ever wider, an enraging uttered from behind his teeth to indicate the deep disapproval he held of such a reckless attempt at victory. "Would you like to duel with swords, or roll around like a carnival performer? Never show your back to the enemy, lest you lose that big head of yours." Renik mustered every available amount of self-control that he could find within to prevent himself from releasing a full flow of colorful phrases brought to the tip of his tongue by the strike he'd failed to anticipate. He succeeded in the attempt, begrudgingly keeping his composure. There would be other times to make use of the carefully selected curses he wished to shout into the grimy, dilapidated, brick-laden courtyard. Other places, with different company, and far fewer consequences for such reactions than would be found with those present. In the end, he settled for a muffled shout of exasperation, turning his frustrations with another failure into a deeper resolve to win. His mind raced as he processed the taste of blood in his mouth, senses numbed by too many stinging aches, brandished by bruises and contusions, shouting loudly within his flesh for any reprieve, for an end to the combat leading to their making. With his left hand, he massaged the base of his neck, checking for cuts where the blade had been slapped across the skin, a dull ache at the base of his skull where he had hit the ground. "Take a few minutes to breathe, lad. You need it. Compose yourself and we'll start again." The old man returned his saber to its scabbard and limped to a small bench some feet away, next to one of the district's many badly maintained municipal wells. Sipping from a glass bottle filled with a dark-colored brew, he sat and grinned at Renik from across the courtyard, still chuckling to himself over the lad's hastily won failure and subsequent burst of ferocity. Renik scowled again, gripping his tin cup of water with enough strength to dent its sides. He inhaled, doing his best to let the anger go and not make a fool of himself with any further outbursts. His teacher was infuriating, but Renik's hasty, rage-induced tactics had proven wisdom from previous lessons to be true, to his shame. "A calm mind begets a clean victory. Rage may bring success, but only because of chance. It is like a flame, warming you for a time, but if it spreads, it consumes everything it touches." Piercing through the tumult of his thoughts, carried by the early afternoon breeze, was the intoxicating, savory sweet scent of brineberry pie calling his attention away. The irresistible aroma wafted down the alley from Hadrick's Hearth, one of Ward Harbor City's most beloved taverns. Mixing with the variegated smells of the city, to Renik, the scent felt like home. The tavern was separated from the courtyard outside his family's dwelling by a stone's throw worth of aging, whitewashed brick apartments and shops, stacked one next to the other in the cramped neighborhood. The hearth, as the locals knew it, was like a bright light in a darkened place to the less fortunate residents of the miser's district, a place of merriment, music, and mirth, beloved by Renik's family and neighbors all. The lively tavern was especially favored by Renik because of the monthly sparring contests hosted outside its doors, an event he'd grown to love over the years since he began training with the blade. Standing there in the midst of warriors and onlookers from across the metropolis, Renik could put his own skills to the test and witness some of the finest fighters of the region display their martial prowess. Those who competed were there to be publicly admired, or hired as mercenaries by traveling merchants, foreign dignitaries, or local nobles alike. Though it was but another tavern in the dirtiest section of the city, the monthly brawls drew spectators from each district of Ward Harbor, regardless of status or affluence. Skill with a blade rarely belonged to the wealthy alone, and anyone with adequate skills could find coin enough if hired by those in need of protection. Many times as a child, Renik had enjoyed the hearth's sweet pastries on one of the city's seasonal festival days, when treats and baubles were given freely to the children in attendance, or as rewards for those brave enough to participate in the contests and games hosted by the city's many nobles and merchant lords. Renik and his peers viewed these seasonal acts of altruistic pageantry as schemes to curry the favor with the less fortunate commoners, a tactic employed to keep peace between the disparate classes. Yet the excitement for their arrival persisted nonetheless, regardless of the original intent. When Renik and his friends grew too old for handouts at festivals, but remained youthful, mischievous lads, the brineberry pie, pastries, and any unattended beverage in sight were acquired by less than honest means, though the delicious flavors were lessened slightly by a nagging conscience souring the taste. There would be time to enjoy such delicacies later if he so desired, and these days it would be acquired by honest coin, painstakingly earned through odd jobs he had taken around the district. For now, he needed to push these thoughts of future comforts far from his mind and win this spar against his current opponent, just once with finality. Then this all too routine, daily required contest of martial prowess, which felt like an exercise in futility to the 18-year-old young man, could be over, and his preparations for the day's adventure could begin. For half a breath, he glanced above the buildings surrounding the courtyard to the towering city walls, daydreams of freedom beyond them tempting his thoughts away. The walls were some 80 feet high, the brilliant afternoon sun currently casting its shadow from its rising path towards the western half of the district, its brightness sure to find its rest in but a few short hours. Precious hours that Renik needed. The walls encompassed and divided up the southern half of the city, spilling them from the high-standing coastal cliffs into the upper slope of the Canth Valley, only to reach northward, climbing to higher elevation before returning to the coastal crags in an unbroken line. The weather-stained, stone-built walls were considered obsolete protection by most, a relic of a former war-torn age, kept, or so it was said, to remind any potential enemies of Ward Harbor's glorious legacy, the city having never been fully conquered by invading armies during the many sieges endured in past conflicts. Built from legendary blue Absam stone by ancient Vergen masons, the faded walls had long since lost their splendor, their deep blue color fading over the centuries. Yet their massive form remained unbroken and firm, too dense and heavy to be deconstructed by the technology and tools of the current era, or too strong to be broken down by the elements. To Renik and many like him, yet consigned to a life in the miser's district, the walls appeared like unto those found in a Grataged prison colony, reminders not of former glories, but of future containment to a life of labor and drudgery which no person of means would look upon with envy. Even so, since coming to Ward Harbor as a young boy, he'd been given a new home in this place, then later earned a life as a young man filled with adventures in the sprawling city, meaningful work within the district, steadfast friends in his neighborhood, and even those he could proudly call family. The city was, to many people, a chaotic, depraved, and vile place. He could admit that side of it was a true reflection, but when seen through his perspective, Ward Harbor was also full of life, good and decent folk to be found in every district, and it was still his home, the place where he first began to know who he truly might be, regardless of the nightmares he had encountered in his youth. "This," he thought to himself, "is where I belong, even if it means dealing with this grinning gadfly and his so-called training every day." Forcing a deep inhalation, he let his muscles relax, releasing a steady breath while convincing his body to silence its many complaints, earnestly promising himself to do his best not to add any more to the already lengthy list of wounds by haste or lack of carefulness again. He locked eyes with his teacher, who stood, drawing his sword to indicate his intention that they resume their practice. Renik stretched his arms, swinging them in an arc to release the tension in his upper back. He bent forward to return his cup to the ground, but the movement triggered even more pain across his bruise-covered body. For one so young, he'd earned himself a lifetime of random scars getting into mischief in the city with Fluke, his next-door neighbor and best friend. The scars on his arms reminded him of their last failed prank at the docks, when he'd fallen into shallow water next to a pier covered in razor-sharp barnacles. They'd found foolishness together many times, but tonight would be different. With Fluke's help, they'd secure a real job that would pay better than the pay of a year's worth of labor combined working around the district. "Just a few more hours, Fluke, and we'll be taking the first steps on our way to the good life." His thoughts returned to the main reason for his many bruises, eyes flicking again towards his opponent, the graying, long-haired man, standing before him, silver-glinting sword held high above his head in the right hand, directly above his grinning, gold-tooth-strewn grin, a sight which Renik, in this moment of continued defeat, found extremely annoying. "Don't go thinking a cry will do you any good now, boy. You'll get no sympathy from me, if you can't keep your head on your shoulders? How many times must you fail to an old cripple before you learn and follow through? You won't get very far if any brigand on the road or in the town can put steel in your belly. The rasping, smoke-rattled voice was one of the most familiar things in Renik's entire world, but at this moment, he would have given anything to silence that mocking tone. Garen Gadfly was the name that most people knew to call the gray-haired man, but Renik knew his true name, a secret he would keep until his dying day, no matter the cost, a name Garen had chosen to leave behind with the life it belonged to. That life had brought Garen to him, and it was because of Renik the old man had left it behind for good. To Renik, the old man was simply Gad, but on occasion, when his tongue would slip, he accidentally called him Dad, an immediately regretted rarity, answered by Garen typically with a jest about having no heir to his hidden fortune, statements which, every time, led to an embarrassed Renik profusely claiming it to be a mistake, an annoying slip of the tongue. Yet, deep within his honest, inner contemplations, even if Garen would never acknowledge it out loud, Renik could admit to himself that this grizzled, often irrational, former mercenary, and likely before that a brigand, was the closest thing in the world he had to a father, a blessing Renik knew was due to the troubled yet generous heart hidden deep beneath Garen's carefully maintained, particularly prickly, exterior personality. He could still remember the first time he'd heard that gruff voice, a day he prayed continuously would be wiped from his mind, though it brought them together, even though it led to the life he now so enjoyed. Though many years created distance between him and that day, the weight of the tragedy he'd thus far sought to bury and forget within his mind carried such pain that it seemed to flash across him like a bolt of lightning, his thoughts suddenly whipping to the past as if he'd fallen through a doorway into memory. Only a few days following his 8th birthday, Solasta, the remote village Renik's family had called home for generations, was attacked in the night by a yet unidentified band of black-hooded figures, each shrouded in wisps of shadow, as if the smoke of a burning flame rose from their cloaks and black leather armor. Running and fighting with an unnatural agility, the invaders wielded blades of iridescent, ember-orange steel in their hands, their savage strikes leaving steaming, blackened blood soaking the floor of every home they breached. As chaos and death consumed nigh on their entire tribe, Renik's own family was annihilated before his eyes, his father having hid him in a secret space within one of the small home's walls, tucked in next to the bricks of the fireplace. His father and his brother Rindon, who was home on leave from duty at the warden post that night, fought valiantly, but were quickly overcome by the hooded assailants, some of which stood a head taller than his father and eldest brother. From within the memory of that musty sanctuary, he could recall the merciless savagery of the ones who took his family members' lives. The night-cast world beyond the walls of the house, lit faintly by occasional bursts of emerald-tinted light, sickly green beams of an alien luminescence shining past the edges of their shuttered windows, a sickly light, quick to disappear along with the woeful brutes who somehow produced it when their attack began. When the invaders left, the young, grieving Renik emerged from the choking depths of the hiding place, his flowing tears soaking the shirts of his mother, father, and siblings, as he begged their gods to bring them back, to restore his family and their tribe. But the gods did not answer him. In that very moment, he chose to let his petitions and questioning agony melt into hatred, flowing forth to fill a new frame, cooling in the cracking crucible of his hardened heart. The silence and loss, forging a grieved determination to find out why the gods remained unwilling or unable. Exhausted and full of grief, Renik covered his family in blankets, then himself with the same, laying down next to his father's cold form, sobbing until the tiredness and anguish slowly drifted into nightmarish, ache-broken sleep. In the morning following the attack, the tired young boy awoke from his many nightmares to the sound of voices outside, different from the harsh, unnatural utterances he remembered of the invaders, whose blood-stained hands and hooded forms were burned into the very shape of his mournful, growing rage. Bands of golden light pushed past the undrawn curtains, revealing thousands of dust particles hanging and dancing in the air as the boy rose from the floor and began to move about. Moving with the carefulness of a mouse in a cat's den, he left his family within the hearth hollow room, creeping forward to gaze through the entry room window with anxious, trembling steps. Peering through the window's warped glass panes, he strained to see past the flowers, small bushes, and chaotic vegetation of his mother's wild garden outside, struggling to identify the silhouettes of several large mounds on the road beyond the garden. The vibrant herbs and plants were several feet tall, and from his vantage point through the bottom pane of glass, his vision remained too obscured to determine what could be scattered across the road between their home and that of the families across from them. With a glance about the road beyond the small garden, the boy found solace and sighed with relief after recognizing the symbol emblazoned upon several men's cloaks or breastplates, a silhouette in gold of waves crashing below 3 mountains, which he knew to be the sigil of the Antrim, an identifier and government-sanctioned symbol worn only by the military of New America. This was a nation established in recent decades after several colonies had freed themselves from the clutches of Grataged to the south, one which Renik's village depended upon for trade in times of scarcity and protection in times of conflict. Or so their officials had promised when they first came to petition the village elders, asking for men who could join their military forces. The village elders refused them the seasoned hunters and warriors, but refrained from forbidding any young men seeking to go of their own volition. Renik's oldest brother, Rundin, left the village a few short weeks later, about 2 seasons ago, to join the American Wardens, much to their father's disapproval. Though his enlistment caused no small stirring of gossip in the village and conflict with his parents, their family and Rundin's many friends still welcomed the zealous young warrior's monthly visits when he was afforded leave, enjoying the stories and gifts he'd gathered in his travels whilst on patrol of the coastlands. The day their eldest brother left to begin his enlistment, Renik and his brother Sherm accompanied Rundin to the nearest warden post, half a day's journey to the south. And Renik remembered the symbol of the Antrim emblazoned on the walls of the tall stone fortress, on the wagon covers outside, and on the soldiers' leather armor. Cautiously, Renik slipped below the window, creeping on hands and feet to reach the other side of the door. Through the wobbling pattern of the glass, he counted the blurred forms of 9 or 10 men next to the garden, close enough to see, and possibly 2 more by the woodline where the road left the village. Most of these men appeared to be much younger than would normally be seen with American soldiers, the majority of them being not much older than Renik's oldest brother, who had completed his trials to be accepted as a respected man within the village only 4 years ago. The gruff voice of one of the older men in the group pierced through the house, drawing Renik's attention back to the scene beyond the window. A sudden, fearful thought spread like wildfire through his mind, and the anxiousness returned as his eyes locked onto the man, drinking in every word in the hope of determining their true intentions at his village.
Could they be the ones who did this to my family? To the village? Is anyone else even alive?
Renik's thoughts continued to spiral, but were assuaged by what the man said, his hope of their good intentions overriding any critical judgment his fears might have kept lingering on.
No survivors that I can see, sir, but it appears they dragged quite a few of them towards the Elder Spine. Perhaps they will press south and sell them to a trapper guild. If we start now, we might catch up to them by sundown.
The Elder Spine Mountains.
Renik whispered the name aloud through a parched tongue and dried lips, reminding him of his former tears and now burning thirst. He knew of the gargantuan, continent-dividing range of peaks from both legends and the stories of the traders who came to their village, hoping to acquire the rare herbs and lodestones harvested from the surrounding marshes and forested vales of the much smaller Cormoudon mountain range. The Elder Spine separated the American coastlands from the mighty Jadoan Empire beyond the mountains, a civilization feared and often hated by his people due to their devotion to only one god, called Jao, and a deep abhorrence of what the Empire's governing religion called the dead gods, the same beings that Renik's people have revered for generations, honoring and petitioning them as the Erakai, meaning masters, when translated to the common tongue. The memory of their silence being the only answer to his anguished cries and petitions for help the night before, he defiantly pushed his thoughts of the Erakai away, mustering himself with several quick breaths. As Renik analyzed the faces of the men searching through the village, he failed to recognize a single one, leading him to suspect these weren't the men he knew to be former compatriots of his brother Rundin. Believing only those who belonged to the nearest warden outpost should have been the first to discover the massacre of his village, numerous suspicions filled his mind concerning their true identities. They spoke too casually for proper soldiers, and he could hear their reactions to the dead, laced with expletives he knew were typically forbidden to the wardens, according to the Antrim Code of Honor by which they gave their oaths of service. As a nervous sweat gathered on his brow, the irregularities he observed condensed into a single fear.
Maybe these really aren't wardens. Maybe they're bandits who've killed wardens and took their uniforms. They're not even all wearing uniforms. Then they killed my family and have come back to finish the job.
Overwhelmed by his fears, he glanced about the house, seeking a means of quick escape. Through the screaming of his instincts to flee, the words of his father came to mind as he fought within himself to pick the best way of escape. Drawing the frequently spoken words from a memory of his first time joining the hunters of his tribe on a voyage to find meat for the village.
Renik, the hunter is only as strong when his heart is sure of what he seeks. His strike will fail if he doubts the weapon used for the killing blow. Just as the blade is forged in fire and quenched in sour water, so is the hunter found in the heat of danger and formed in the cold of trial. Choose well what steel is forged in the fire of your mind, lest the blade crack in the quenching of your doubt.
The warm memory of that cold winter day brought new resolve to the young boy's heart, and he tensed, leaning forward to begin moving to the rear of the house so he could escape through the back door, running to the woodline. But then another voice carried across the garden and into the house, stopping Renik at the door as he stiffened up to better hear what was said.
The wardens didn't hire us to track brigands or devil through the swamp, Cargyle. They hired us to take the heads of any remaining Baroness scum we encounter looting on the roads. Did you see any Baroness scum about the roads this morning? Does this ruin look like Baroner brutality? Could it be? There's too many dead. Who would have carted off at least half of these poor folk before leaving? No, this is something else. Something darker.
It was as if a chill swept across the men as the words fell to silence, their gazes on the mounds obscured to Renik by the tall garden vegetation on the main road.
Well, are there any survivors?
The older soldier swept a glance to the men picking through the remains of Solasta for a report, and was met with only grimaces and down-turned shaking heads, indicating no living were to be found.
Well then, let's be on our way. I'd rather be at the Warden Hall by nightfall. I'll make a report there about this place.
Renik began moving back from the door, unsure of what to do. In the process of turning about, his knee slammed into a large shelf in the front room, bringing forth an immense amount of pain, and a shout from the young boy. Moments later, the form of a man stood before the home's doorway, a voice ringing out.
I think we might have missed someone. Hello, anyone left inside?
The voice seemed familiar, even in a memory from a decade ago when it was far different, and the voice was less gruff and raspy from a persistent cough that was then only mild. A cough born from a badly hidden penchant for Ermati rolled cigars. Even through the door, he remembered sensing the acrid smell exuded by that pungent mixture of burning herbs, emanating from the mud-splattered cloak of an inquisitive, decade-younger Garen standing outside. Scrambling backwards as he heard the locked door handle begin to jostle, Renik lost his footing, falling upon the blanket-covered, cold and stiffened body of his brother Rundin, uncovering his graying feet in the commotion. Stunned by the panging touch of remembrance brought by the renewed sight of his brother's lifeless form, Renik sat frozen in a disheveled heap upon the floor, overwhelmed by the inescapable reality of his agonizing loss. As his vision blurred from the hot sting of his tears, he hunched forward, placing his left hand on the floor to steady himself. At the tip of his fingers he felt a small lump, something solid he couldn't identify for all the dirt and pooled blood covering its exterior, tracked in during the invasion of his home the previous evening, or spilled in the chaos of his brother and father's struggle to survive. The shape of it puzzled him, as he immediately understood it to be something he'd never seen before while he felt it in his hands. Beneath the dirt, muddy red clay, and dried blood soiling it, he felt a firm circular form, crisscrossed with several bands and ridges. At a glance, its edges appeared metallic, dully reflecting the light where its true exterior had been revealed. Renik had never gone hungry a day in his life. The forested Carmarthen Range surrounding his tribe's valley afforded them almost everything they needed, but makings of metal and modern trinkets were so costly and so rare in his village that even at 8 years of age, he could recall every piece of steel, gold, silver, or copper witnessed in his family's home, or of any other metal for that matter, down to the spare nails his father kept securely locked in the shed outside. Unrelenting curiosity filled him to the brim with renewed vigor, and he raced against the opening of the front door to see the true form of such an enigmatic discovery. Grabbing a nearby cloth from the floor, he hastily wiped the lump clean, pulling away the grime to reveal a medallion of intricate fashioning, comprised of a circular piece of brassy metal as large as his wrist, and several strips of copper-like metal, the width of Renik's finger, welded upon it, arranged together in a uniform pattern of 3 triangles, which flowed into one another as one unending line, its entire surface stamped or carved with characters in an unknown script, symbols or sigils from a tongue Renik knew not. Weeks later, he would come to learn of the medallion's likely origins, that would have come from Judean clerics, who awarded them to the newly committed faithful of their church. He recalled his brother speaking of witnessing the church's traveling acolytes, preaching and healing the sick in the coastlands, testimonies which inevitably sparked heated debates between his father, loyal to the Arakai, and Rundan, who upset their parents with questions such as, "If the Arakai are so good to us, why do our people live in exile? When the Judeans flourish and prosper? Maybe they're right, and Jael killed the old gods. The Arakai never answered my prayers, not without a blood gift anyway. What kind of price is that?" Because of Rundan's religious protestations, Renik would come to assume the medallion was his brother's in the following months, dropped while his family sought to resist the butchers who'd taken their lives. But on that morning, he first discovered it. It remained a mystery, a token to remind him of the end of his family's lives and the death of his innocence. The front door opened, shaking him from his morbid curiosity. With a near instinctual swiftness born of mischievous pranks, duels with wooden swords, and years spent playing children's games invented to test one's sleight of hand, Renik shoved the object into his pocket, brandishing a mask of indignant rage as he turned to face the newest intruder of his now tarnished home.
"Whoa there, laddie. It's all right now. You don't have to look like you want to kill me. We're here to help."
Renik growled at the man, baring his teeth like a feral animal in a final attempt to communicate his distrust and the rage he felt within.
"It's all right, lad. I'm not going to hurt you."
The man raised his hands placatingly while making shushing sounds in a gentle tone. "Shh, shh, shh." Speaking softly, he continued,
"We've come to help. Is there anyone else here with you? Or anyone, or anything dangerous, son? We're gonna get you somewhere safe, don't worry. I can tell you've been through a lot. My name is Garen Gadfly, but my friends call me Gad. Me and the gentleman you see meandering about outside are but humble servants of the Antrim Council. I suppose you could call us honorary wardens. By the Creator's kindness, we happened to be travelling through this territory, and we saw the smoke. Too much to be coming from smoke tops of such a small village. What's your name, son?"
By nightfall of the following day, Renik was secured at the American warden post, watched over the entire journey by Garin, the first to find him in his ravaged home. The boy had refused to leave his family, shouting, biting, and kicking in protestation at leaving them to rot, and the commander, to the surprise of his men, allowed Garin and 2 others in their company to stay behind and bury Renik's family to placate the boy, promising to send men from the warden post to bury the rest as soon as possible. Even after they were buried, Renik resisted leaving Solasta, but Garin persisted, convincing Renik, after no small amount of pleading and gently spoken promises, of fruit tart candies and a tour of the warden post armory. For months, Garin remained the only adult that the young, traumatized Renik would converse with or acknowledge. After acquiring permission and formal documentation of the Solasta massacre from his commander, Garin took leave of his company and brought Renik to his family home in Ward Harbor, entrusting care of the boy to his sister Risa and her husband Tessik, who welcomed the silent boy to join their ranks of numerous children, some of which were also orphans from across the war-torn region. There Renik had remained until Garin retired from soldiering and his odd jobs to live in Ward Harbor. Each time Garin would visit, Renik was like a new child, gaining confidence and his voice over time. Though the boy seemed to have forgotten much of what brought him to Ward Harbor in the first place. When the Bloom-Rot famine erupted across the coastland 2 years later, leaving thousands dead in its wake, he could remember when Garin had once said, "Daydreaming again, are we? What kind of fool are ya? Dozing off mid-battle? Here's another flood your brains other half the work too." Bristling, spine-bending pain arched through Renik's shoulders, forcing his attention back from yet another daydream. Dehydrated, already sore, and utterly exhausted because of the mischief of his previous evening, which regrettably needed his attention until dawn, Renik's mind was lagging behind enough that even the injured old Garin was besting him without much struggle. And the old man was right. If I can't even deal with old Gad, how will I survive beyond the city walls where rogues and wraiths wander the roads? As he thought to himself, he moved like a rogue wave set to travel further ashore than those pushing with it, and summoned an unlikely resolve, eyes locked upon Garin's blade, taking them away only to analyze the movement of his teacher's feet and the posture of his shoulders. Sensing another strike by the shifting of Garin's foot, Renik dashed forward, bringing his blade up from a lowered stance as if to slash Garin from waist to shoulder. And as Garin began reacting in the way Renik had hoped he would, according to habit, the young man let his weight shift down, his left leg bending at the knee, while his right leg slid forward, his momentum carrying him until he slid to a stop in front of Garin's outstretched arms and blade, the tip of his own sword resting gently on the skin beneath Garin's chin. I can take a hit, and I'm fast, old man. I'm smart too, not that you'd admit it, right? I'm just exhausted, that's all. If I wasn't so tired, I would have beaten you from the start. Sure, lad, sure. And why are you so exhausted, now that you mention it? A little dragon told me this morning that you did a job with the McCoven brothers' crew in the Gilder district. Is that true? By now, Garin's sword was in its own scabbard, his hands fidgeting with the metal tube containing one of his favorite cigars, but his eyes remained locked on Renik's, a searching expression drawn tightly across his face. Renik could tell their fight was over. Gad, A painfully long pause filled the air as Renik fought to find the words he thought could placate the old man. We weren't skiving with the McCoven brothers. Yes, Fluke and I met some friends in Gildertown, but we didn't do anything we shouldn't have. We ran into Darren McCoven while we were there, that's all. We went to, never mind, you wouldn't care anyway. Garin sighed, a knowing smile replacing the scowl on his face. 'Twas for the smile of a bonny girl, wasn't it? At hearing this unexpected form of inquiry, Renik couldn't help but blush, and as he turned away, eyes cast at the ground, his pitiful attempt to deny it only further confirmed Garin's suspicions. It's nothing to be ashamed of, my boy. Seeking the attentions of a fair maiden.
Every young man finds himself in an earnest search for such things at one point or another in his zealous years. But hear me, lad. Keep far from that rat's den of a crew. The McCoven family isn't like ours. They take in the poorest of boys and turn them into the deadliest dregs of the whole district. They might pay well, but you're better off working for anyone else till your chance at the academy comes round. Why don't you give a hand to your Uncle Schnee at the Arboreum, or work with your Aunt Hespa at the tavern? I've heard your singing voice too. It's good. And so is the coin thrown by a drunken crowd on stage at Heydrich's for a good song. No? Well then perhaps the monastery. I don't mean you need to join the ranks, boy, but they pay well for security when they leave the city walls. Better company with a bald holy man than the McCovens, is all I'm saying.
Renik stood with his shoulders slumped, hands resting loosely on the handle of his sword now resecured in its scabbard. His weight shifted back as he stared at the ground. His thoughts were more chaotic now than in his exhaustion-induced daydreaming, and pangs of guilt stabbed each moment in his heart. He wanted to tell Garen the entire truth. His conscience believing a partial truth is no better than a lie to one such as his adopted father. But he could predict Garen's reaction, were the tired warrior to discover the true reason Renik and Fluke had encountered some of the McCoven crew the previous evening. Yes, they had gone to see friends from their school years, and accompanying them were some ladies of interest to Renik and his friends. One of these ladies in particular had been the choice of Renik's eye for many years, one Miss Lillian Ferris, the daughter of Carvel Ferris, a high-ranking city administrator and extremely wealthy man. Renik knew he could never gain her father's permission to court, and thus he'd never tried. It was well known those raised in the miser's district rarely find happiness stealing away with those born to a family of the incredibly wealthy Gildertowners, save for if they leave the city altogether, and even then, wealth buys assassins that will travel far. Renik refused to bring such dishonor to a young woman he admired so much, and chose instead to pursue a life which would afford him, as quickly as possible, the wealth and status he would need to court Lillian without scandal. Thus, the ultimate reason for him and Fluke being in Gildertown, to meet with Darren and Clade McCoven about
We got a big job coming up. Biggest one for a while. Big shot emissaries from all the former colonies coming into Gildertown for a convention, but they're opening a new casino the same night to play off the hype. They're gonna call the casino the Tempest Prize, but I tell you what, you come on this job, Renik, and you two will have a prize big enough to last you half your life. You in? We'll need you smart, and we'll need you fast.
Renik looked at Garen with the last of his strength, fighting his shouting conscience to remain silent. He wanted to tell Garen the truth, talk to Fluke, and call off the job. A small voice within him shouting continually to abandon the plan, to take Garen's advice, and find a job that he knew with surety would pay from legal means. Yet his mind swirled with images of Lillian, the sound of her laughter, her beautiful smile etched into his memory. Like the slightest breeze whipping up the leaves on a forest floor, a thought wriggled its way to the forefront of his mind. A cold, selfish thought, one that schemed for a life he had always envied, no matter the cost.
Can Garen really understand? He's so cold he's never even truly loved a woman. And besides, he was raised in wealth, before the famine. They had everything they could ever want. How could he understand a choice like I'm dealing with?
His desire for a life with Lillian, combined with his jealousy of the Gilder folk and their immaculate existence, their endless comforts, and constant confidence that tomorrow would be taken care of. Divided between two opposing paths, he pondered one of routine, hard work, and struggle, but of truth, and the other, one of richly gilded delights, comfort and security, but born of shadows. For now, Renik determined to choose the latter path, promising himself he would be different from those who walked the darkness before him, such as the McCovens, that he would find a way to balance his morals and the inevitable temptations afforded to those who work in darkness, disregarding the law for gain. But first, he needed to ensure Garen wouldn't prevent the plans he'd agreed to. For this evening, he needed to assuage the old man's suspicions.
Garen, she is very pretty, and I'll definitely have her attention. I'm taking her to the Gindalope Gardens. Wish me luck.
Renik forced a mischievous grin to his face and braced for further scrutiny, but his portrayal of boyish embarrassment succeeded in convincing Garen of his innocence. The ruse met only with an ear-to-ear grin and gregarious chortling. For a moment, Renik felt conflicted, even disappointed that Garen hadn't seen right through him, as was so often the normal course of events in the past. Part of him genuinely wanted Garen to stop him, to set him right with a monologue about responsibility and honor, forcing his hand to reach for the straight and narrow path. Walking side by side to the public well in the dingy courtyard, the pair drew water and doused their heads, discussing their previous mistakes in combat, established strengths, and what techniques to pursue in the future, until finally, Renik spoke a respectful but pallid farewell, slipping away with hurried steps to change clothes before his evening's endeavors began. Before leaving the courtyard, Renik turned to look one final time at Garen, the one person he owed his life, his family, and training to, who had given him a home, the gleanings of his wisdom, and his care. It felt wrong to so casually deceive a mentor, a friend, a father. But the allure of his desires born of envy and a muted conscience were too strong. He would do what he must, to have his way, and he would prove Garen wrong in the end. Or so he told himself. As he opened the door to his room, Renik froze in place as a feminine, rasping voice rang out inside his head, slightly more than a whisper, vaguely familiar though its source was undetectable, sounding as if someone stood just to the right of him, leaning in closely to his ear. Each word seemed to flash through his mind as if a flame had been kindled somewhere just beyond his field of view, its light reflecting off the walls and the furniture he stood beside.
This was the moment you set the course of your life towards darkness, wouldn't you agree? Your heart was torn between the wisdom of your teacher and the tantalizing treasure of thieves. This was the day you traded truth for what mortals so often call pleasure and security. This choice, what it brought you in the end, pray tell, was it worth what it cost you?
Suddenly, blackness warped around Renik like a maelstrom in a vast sea. His sight and memory set spinning about like stars sped up in their rotation across the sky, budding points of light, and consciousness becoming a kaleidoscope of his surroundings, his vision shifting and turning into a vortex of color and shifting patterns as his perceptions began to blur, and his room, his belongings within it, and the building around him rapidly dissolved into nothingness. He felt disjointed within his own mind, as if a vast space existed between his immediate perceptions and the moments he had just experienced with Garen in the courtyard. Was he sick, or had someone struck him in the back of the head while he wasn't paying attention? Could the water in the well have been tainted, or made vile by something dead falling in that they hadn't noticed before drinking? His pulse quickened, echoed by the sound of a drum beating in his head. A sonorous panging loudly resonated within him for several moments until the realization struck that it was his own heartbeat creating the tempo. Utter darkness surrounded him. No longer could he see the room that was once his in the time he'd lived in Ward Harbor, nor could he hear the cacophony of Ward Harbor's streets beyond the courtyard's brick walls. Gone from the air was the alluring scent of brineberry pie from Hadrick's, a smell he'd found so comforting but minutes before. Now, it filled him with dread as it slipped away, feeding his trepidation each moment that he sought to comfort himself by smelling it again in the air. Shocked by the realization that his fight with Garen now appeared but a distant memory, as nothing more than a recollection that somehow had been drugged to the surface of his thoughts and relived, his breathing quickened, while his thoughts began questioning his very existence, spurred on by rapidly evolving fears. He raised his hand before his face, or so it felt, but nothing appeared before him. Only blackness could be found, a void undefined spreading out to every perceptible point. Was that just a memory? It feels so familiar, yet distant. Where am I now? What is this place? Am I asleep? Or am I dying? Am I dead? The panic clamoring within him began to peak, soon to overcome his sense of control, the surrounding void and bodily disjointedness pressing in like an unrelenting grip around his neck, ebbing from an unforeseen force beyond him, a distinct intelligence he somehow knew was searching his mind, prying into his long-hidden memories, reading his innermost thoughts. As the overwhelming weight of it all brought forth the sensation of slowly suffocating his breath, the voice from before spoke again, this time in a reassuring, comforting tone, its gentleness and surprising familiarity immediately soothing the tumultuous storm within him, though he couldn't understand exactly why. The voice sounded the same as the first, save for the addition of a vibrancy it lacked when originally speaking, a depth and confidence so genuine it became like a golden light to Renik in the darkness he now thrashed within. He knew this voice. He couldn't remember where he'd heard it before, but the longer it sounded in his mind, the more familiar it became. As the voice spoke, each word seemed to pulse like a light in his darkness, a warm golden light, full of confidence and strength, resplendent as sunshine at midday.
Peace, warrior. Peace to you. By the Creator's call, peace. You have nothing to fear, so long as you speak the truth. But to proceed, for us to complete this examination, you must answer my questions. There is much you have hidden from even yourself, and we cannot leave these things bound in shadows. There they will fester like an uncleaned wound. These wounds have not scarred, but rather putrefied. Face them, let the king see all, and you will heal over time. Conquer them within yourself for your own heart to see, and you will find your strength. Answer well, warrior, and hide nothing. These stones reveal all that is concealed. Was your choice that day, and all that it brought you, worth what it cost you?
Renik beheld the shimmering lights cast by the words piercing the blackness around him as he pondered the question poised by the rasping voice. He forced himself to admit the wisdom spoken to him was true, that he'd all but forgotten his conversation with Garen from that day, or changed the memory of it over the years because of what followed from it. Now, after seeing that day in such vivid recollection, he could tell where he'd lied to himself about its substance. Before, he'd let himself believe Garen had seen through his lies, but chose not to speak up, either for the sake of cowardice or apathy. He even blamed Garen for what followed, faulting his teacher's inability to stop such a young mind from seeking such foolishness. But now, he could clearly see the fault was entirely his own. Garen was no fool, nor coward. He'd raised Renik up in truth and right behavior. Yet on that day, Renik had chosen to scorn such wisdom, and Garen had only respected Renik's privacy as a young man, trusting him to make his own way according to what he'd been taught was right and good. Renik was no child then, nor a fool. He'd simply chosen to forego his teacher's lessons about honor, about truth, and choosing instead what he believed to be the easier path. Had he known what such folly would bring to bear, he would have never chosen to walk down such a deadly road. I can see that moment with Garen is when I truly betrayed my family and my honor, betrayed them for foolish things. And yet, a cloud hangs over the memory of what followed it. I cannot see entirely what came next. Will you help me?
Yes, warrior, I will help you. Witness what was obscured in shadow by your pain and regret. Take courage and do not falter, lest the shadows claim you again. The chamber of decision reveals all that is hidden in shadow.
Like water cascading over his head and down his spine, he felt a warm sensation spill over him as the voice spoke, a reverberating word he could hear only in echo, a word imbued with incredible power. As the warmth spread through his entire being, he began to recall the evening following his fateful choice of the path he'd known Garen would scorn, his eyes flicking about the flurry of images from that life-changing night that swirled before him, the people and places within them flashing around, depicted upon a blurry-edged window materializing within the nothingness surrounding him, held at an imperceptible distance from where he now floated, suspended in the nothing. If I must face this, then so be it. Remembrance of moments long suppressed crashed over his psyche like ocean waves spilling upon sharpened rocks. As the memory filled the void around him, he could see himself and his childhood friend Fluke in an alleyway just outside the gate to Gildertown, donning mottled gray cloaks to conceal their forms before they entered the flow of the crowd meandering about the opulently decorated district. Mere seconds passed before Renik found himself fully cast within the memory, reliving the night that had set him upon the path of misery he'd long sought to forget and leave behind. They broke off from the flow of boisterous folk patronizing the area's many taverns and shops, hurriedly stealing into a sheltered courtyard between several apartment buildings. Removing their hoods, the friends joined half a dozen young men from the McCoven crew as they gathered down the lane from the newly opened Tempest Prize Casino. He saw the confident grins on the young men's faces, shared by Fluke and himself, as Clade, the eldest of the McCoven brothers, explained their plan, each step of it bringing out small shouts of excitement from the zealous troop. 10 minutes later, each young man understood what was expected of him once inside: who would bribe which employee, where to go, and what to say if they were caught.
And don't go pulling a knife on anyone unless they pull one on you when we're leaving. You'll draw too much attention. Knock them down if they're in your way and keep moving. If you get caught, we'll get you out of the clink, on my honor as a McCoven. But it's a lot easier to bribe the guards to let a thief out of jail than someone who has sliced up a citizen.
2 by 2 they left the courtyard, staggering their exits by a few minutes between departures. Each pair walked to the rear of the casino, finding an alleyway leading to the building's garbage disposal area, kept hidden by a tall gate, a breach in the casino's security left open by a newly hired kitchen cook, bribed by Clade ahead of time. 15-foot-high walls of cut stone enclosed the space, preventing prying eyes from spotting their circumspect entries beyond the gate. Once the crew fully gathered behind a large pile of rubbish and empty crates left uncleared after the casino's opening day preparations, they waited until the clock struck the hour, and by way of the placated cook within the casino, an alarm to signal a fire in the building was falsely raised, leading to swift evacuations of the Tempest Prize's guest rooms, the lavish dining halls, and opulent card rooms. Hundreds of terrified patrons and employees ran to escape, heading through the main exits at the front and sides of the complex. Unbeknownst to the gang, the tumultuous commotion and chaos caused by the escaping patrons and employees led to a real fire spreading within the kitchens, and a hungering blaze began to consume the building from within, undetected by them as they made their way deeper inside the casino's sublevels below. Unaware of the swiftly growing threat on the floors above them, the group excitedly rushed through the employee service corridors, taking a stairway to the lowest floor to reach their target. With muffled shouts of joy, they found the office of Guido Slickener, a pit boss and high-ranking member of a rival gang, the Wardwrecker crew, longtime enemies of the McCovens. Having purchased a copy of Guido's office key, schedule, and the combination to his private safe for one of his less than loyal, underpaid, and highly observant bodyguards, the crew gleefully entered the richly decorated room, quickly liberating several thousand thrimsa of precious gold bars and coins from Guido's safe, along with a number of small, aetheric-imbued items or weapons that were beyond their means to identify, yet were deemed too valuable to leave behind. In but 10 or so minutes, the contents of the safe had been emptied into leather sacks, and with exuberant yet muted cries of delight at their apparently easy score, the young men reopened the office door, expecting to escape with the same haste as which they'd entered the casino. Black smoke and stinging heat immediately choked the doorway, the pressure within the corridor beyond forcing creeping tendrils and plumes of acrid vapors, billowing its way into the room with explosive fury. At the sight of such a deadly intrusion, panic besought the young men, laden down with their sacks of treasure, all joyous celebrations now ceased. Their perilous circumstances froze them in place as they trembled with rising fear. From his side, Fluke cried out,
Renik, what are we going to do?
The temperature around them rapidly began to increase like a kindled cook stove, the noxious fumes above them forcing most to cover their mouths with their cloaks or shirt collars, while the rest tried to gasp through the choking, lung-splitting spasms of painful coughing. Moving towards the doorway with hesitant steps, Clade turned to look at the trembling young men behind him, their backs to the wall furthest from the door, and shouted,
It's every man for himself! Get out while you can!
The older boy sprinted into the smoke, realizing there were no windows in the underground office by which to break free from the encroaching nightmare creeping in upon their pitiful crew. Renik could see the fear in Fluke's face as he turned to assess his faltering friend. A cold resignation stamped across his own visage, masking the utter fear that gripped him within, if only to comfort the younger boy and keep him from succumbing to his terror. Mustering up the courage to lead the rest of the young men out of the inferno, Renik removed the cloak he'd held tight around his nose and mouth, shouting,
Fluke and I will lead the way. If we stick together and help one another find the exit, we can all go home tonight. And keep what we came for. Wrap your faces with cloaks or a handkerchief. Don't breathe in any smoke or the fumes will knock you out, or worse.
Together, he and Fluke stepped towards the door to follow after Clade, but found themselves toppled to the floor a moment later, violently shoved to the ground by Darren McCubbin and one of the larger thugs belonging to his gang. Once he'd realized what had happened, Renik threw himself at the larger of the two, knocking the hulking young man to the ground with surprising strength for someone of Renik's comparatively smaller size. In the scuffle, Fluke's sack of gold was knocked to the floor, only to be scooped up by Darren, who handed it off to another of his crew before drawing a pistola from its hiding place within his coat pocket. Renik continued wrestling with his target, not noticing the weapon's emergence, laying heavy blows into the face of the one who'd smacked Fluke to the floor, but raised his hands and pulled back as quickly as he could when Darren pointed the weapon at Fluke's head.
You heard what Clade said. Every man for himself, and that means I'll be taking this.
He allowed the coins to shake in his hand for a moment.
Good luck, miser scum. Don't stay too long or you'll cook like a fish in the sun.
Once the words finished leaving his mouth, Darren spit on the carpet in their direction and turned to make his leave. The larger thug picked himself up from the ground and stupidly began to chuckle.
Good one, Darren. Cook like a fish.
It wasn't a joke, Algan. Shut up, would ya?
Facing the door, Darren ordered his crew to give him a few seconds lead, telling one in particular to point their own pistola at Renik until those belonging to the McCubbins made an exit first. A minute later, they were gone, and only Renik and Fluke remained in the smoky confines of the rapidly warming office.
Fluke, stick close to me. Don't let go no matter what you do. I'll get us out of here, brother. Trust me.
He forced a smile to his face that he hoped was convincing enough to reassure his trembling friend, and finding no response forthcoming, grabbed him by the hand and brought them closer to the door. With his cloak clenched in one hand, holding it tightly to his face, he pushed forward into the corridor, eyes stinging from the sour fumes and burning air. In the blackness of the choking smoke, Renik attempted to lead Fluke out, finally reaching the stairway to the floor above after several minutes of blinded searching. Coughing and gasping for air, the pair sought to retrace their steps to where they'd originally entered the casino, stopping in desperation after finding their path blocked by a collapsed beam engulfed in roaring flames from the floor above. Finding an unlocked door they'd passed before, Renik forced himself and Fluke into one of the large rooms where patrons had laughed and enjoyed their wild betting games but a short while before. A massive space, now caught up in a racing inferno, the air so hot, Renik felt like his skin would bubble.
No, turn around!
Renik shouted at himself through the void, the memory so real, for a moment he believed he might actually be heard by his older self. The memory continued playing out before his eyes in horrifying sharpness, showing Renik's younger self turning too late to pull Fluke out of the way, as the flame-engulfed ceiling began to collapse piece by piece. From the blaze above crashed a massive chunk of the burning roof, wreathed in flames like a falling star, a shadow at the edge of his vision that became an enemy he could never defend against. In that single moment, the life of Renik's first and greatest friend he'd made in Ward Harbor was snuffed out, taken by debris set to fall after the touch of the devouring blaze. He stood staring at the place where Fluke had been but seconds ago, the flames licking up from the debris to catch his own clothes alight. He remained there until his body forced him to retreat, the flames having already burned through much of his clothing, hair, and the upper layers of his skin. Even then, at first, he didn't notice. In shock, Renik stumbled backward through the inferno growing around him, pushing past tables, chairs, and ashen playing cards. His reactions and sense of pain dulled as he broke through the front door of the building, the treasure-filled bag still tied to his belt, his mottled gray cloak burning up his back. But he didn't notice. The image of the debris atop Fluke still played across his mind. Many gasped within the crowd at his appearance, shouting for the guards to help him. The city guard ran to him, at first treating him as they would any patron of the casino, rendering aid without question, carrying him away with gentleness as they would a resident of Gildertown. Yet after realizing his age, his identity and residence in the Miser's district, and the absurdity of such a quantity of golden thrimsa being in his possession, they brought him away to the clerics, first to be healed, and once sufficiently restored, to the jails for questioning. But he didn't notice. Later that evening, Garen visited him in his cell, pleading with him to explain what had led to his arrest, but even this, he didn't notice. His eyes were open, but within his own mind, all he could see was his friend's face the moment before he was gone. All he could see were the flames falling from above, their terrible weight covering Fluke in but a moment. The window of memory began to close, shifting and swirling as it shrunk in size until nothing but the void remained. Mind reeling from the recollection of such a painful experience, Renik struggled to bring words to bear, though he could see no tears falling as he peered down. He felt their heat pooling around his eyes nonetheless, the wetness of his face as they slid down his right cheek.
No, it wasn't worth it. It was foolishness. And it cost me just about everything I loved. My family, my best friend, my honor, and my freedom. I wish I'd just listened to Garen's words and been honest with him that day. I wish I'd never spoken a word to Darren and Clade McCoven in the first place. I wish I'd never involved Fluke at all. He trusted me, and I got him killed. If I'd just... he'd still be alive, and Tell me, truthfully, why are we doing this? Why force me to see these things? I left these memories behind for a reason.
It is because you left them behind that we must revisit them. If you are to pass the trial of the ages, you cannot enter it without first truly accepting what has transpired to create your reality, those things which led you to seek the trial in the first. Whilst you are here, in this chamber of decision, you must see yourself for who you are, in order to truthfully present to the king who you are now. He will detect any deception or shifting shadows within you. If you have not declared these yourself, he cannot accept you, and you will fail the trial. It reveals all that one seeks to keep hidden, and hidden things often lead to more than just failure.
Renik's thoughts raced faster, trying to piece together how all of the reasons given could possibly relate to this tragedy of his past. The trial of the ages, something I must overcome. The chamber of decision, something I must endure. The king, someone whom I hope to serve. Flashes of familiar memories danced across the periphery of his mind, but remained obscured, only partially accessible from where his mind was now held. He recalled a long journey from the coastlands with a large caravan of travelers on horseback and by wagon, trekking the foothills of massive towering mountains, following a highway surrounded by fields of wheat and Bellembar as far as his eyes could see, and tall, towering spires of white stone in every settlement, every town, and every city he'd traveled through. A verdant, thick forest of red bark oaks, the canopy reaching nearly to the height of 30 tall men standing upon one another's shoulders. A huge multi-tiered building made of massive white stone blocks, tinged with veins of gold and platinum, built straight into the side of a vertical cliff face, a waterfall cascading behind the building. The sound of its roar, the crashing deluge echoing across the lush, forested valley which reached up to meet the structure. He remembered only glimpses, but knew for a truth they were a path he'd chosen, a path which he'd set upon, speaking but one word day by day as his dire motivation: redemption. Whatever the course he'd chosen that led to the test he now undertook, he felt confident it was pursued out of his own will and for his own good, even if he couldn't explain why in his current condition. Very well then. Let's continue. What is left?